Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain. She is going to have to spill the beans, Angela, and that's where the fear from the British royal family comes from.
There is a difference between intimidating critics and taking them to court. That difference is exactly where this story gets dangerous. Because once a legal threat turns into an actual defamation case, the conversation stops being about headlines, spin, and public sympathy. It becomes about records, timelines, documents, testimony. And that is why the latest clash involving Prince Harry, Meghan, Lady Colin Campbell, and Tom Bower matters far beyond another round of royal drama. The core issue here is not just what was said, it is what could be exposed if anyone tries to prove it in court. For years, Harry and Meghan have relied on a familiar strategy when criticism gets too close. Denounce it, dismiss it, threaten action, and let the pressure do the work. Most people back off long before anything reaches a judge. That is how reputation battles are usually fought in public life. Noise is often enough. But Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower are not the kind of people who scare easily. Lady C has spent decades inside royal-adjacent circles, building a reputation on saying things early, sometimes controversially, and then waiting for time to catch up. Tom Bower is something else entirely, an investigator with a long record of going after powerful figures and digging where others stop. These are not random commentators tossing out speculation for attention. In the source material, they are presented as people who believe a courtroom would not weaken their case, but strengthen it. And that changes the balance immediately. Because if Harry were ever to sue, he would not just be demanding silence. He would be opening the door to discovery. That is the part many public figures forget when they start talking about defamation. Discovery is not theater. It is not a press release. It is the phase where the other side gets to ask for the material behind the story. Private communications, medical records where relevant and legally obtainable, internal timelines, witness accounts. The very paper trail that image management is designed to keep out of sight. That is why Lady C's response lands the way it does, not because it is loud, but because it is calm. Let him sue me. That line works because it suggests she does not see the courtroom as a threat. She sees it as leverage. The source frames Tom Bower the same way. According to this account, he has already looked into the hospitals associated with the births in London and California, and says his inquiries did not produce the kind of straightforward confirmation many people assume would exist. Whether that absence means anything definitive is exactly the kind of question that would matter in a legal setting. Rumor can float forever in public. In court, it either hardens into evidence or collapses under scrutiny. And that is the deeper tension here. This story is really about control. Who has it now, and who loses it first? Harry and Meghan have built their post-royal life on narrative authority. Their value, financially and culturally, depends on being able to define themselves before others do. They are not just public figures. They are a brand. The devoted couple, the embattled truth-tellers, the family that broke away and told its side directly. That image has carried interviews, documentaries, deals, and years of media attention. So when questions arise that cut into the foundation of that image, the instinct to shut them down is understandable. The problem is that legal action does not just suppress a narrative. It can force a different one into the open. That is where the source material keeps returning to one explosive theme: the children, the birth records, and the long-running speculation around secrecy. Not proof, speculation. But speculation fed, in this telling, by unusual choices and unusual wording. The script points to the lack of the traditional royal transparency that usually surrounds births connected to the line of succession. No named doctors, no typical presentation, no familiar palace structure to settle public curiosity early. Into that vacuum came interpretation, suspicion, and increasingly aggressive scrutiny.
patted her bum from time to time because it didn't look big enough to her, the right shape to her, what have you. I 100% believe that's entirely a possibility. But the whole pregnancy, no, if you know surrogacy laws in the UK, I believe, is that not only can you not pay somebody to do it.
Then it piles on the details that made those suspicions spread. The behavior of Meghan's baby bump in public appearances, observations attributed to retired nurses, midwives, and obstetric professionals, questions about changing shape and size, her movements while heavily pregnant, and repeated fixation on moments critics considered physically inconsistent. On their own, those details prove nothing. But in the ecosystem of royal suspicion, they became fuel. Lady C, as described in the source, did not initially embrace any of that. The material actually makes a point of saying she began from skepticism. What changed her, it says, was not internet chatter, but repeated calls, source conversations, and growing concern inside palace circles. That shift matters because it is part of what gives her current posture its force. She is presented not as someone chasing a wild theory from the start, but as someone who gradually concluded that the story around the pregnancies deserved closer examination. The source also leans heavily on language. Specifically, the phrasing in the birth announcements, born for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, rather than born to them. Lady C is said to view that wording as significant, possibly deliberate, and potentially reflective of an arrangement the public was never plainly told about. Again, that is not proof. But it is exactly the kind of linguistic detail that becomes symbolic in a wider controversy, because people start asking whether official wording was crafted to reveal something carefully without stating it outright. Bauer's alleged hospital inquiries add another layer in the source material. The suggestion is not that he found a smoking gun, but that he did not find the expected paper trail. Sometimes absence is just absence. Sometimes it becomes the start of a much larger argument. The source wants the audience to sit in that uncertainty and ask the same question over and over. If everything is straightforward, why does so much around this story feel so guarded? That is also why the source brings up Harry's own public slip, the moment where he referenced the baby changing over 2 weeks, and Meghan corrected it to 2 days. It treats that not as definitive evidence of anything, but as one more crack in an already fragile narrative. In controversies like this, people do not need one giant contradiction. They build momentum out of 10 smaller ones. And now the legal angle raises the stakes, because in public, Harry and Meghan can still rely on ambiguity. They can refuse to dignify claims. They can label them malicious. They can say the speculation is cruel and invasive. In court, that becomes harder. A defamation claim does not work just because someone feels attacked. The plaintiff has to show falsity. That means evidence. That means clarity. And clarity is precisely what this saga has lacked. The source reinforces that point by connecting it to the Samantha Markle case, arguing that once litigation begins, questions that once lived in tabloids and online arguments can end up under oath. Depositions are not podcasts. They are not curated interviews. They are procedural machines designed to narrow gaps between claim and proof. That is why so many observers, especially those already suspicious, almost seem to want the lawsuit to happen, not because they like the spectacle, but because they see the courtroom as the one place where branding loses its advantage. No prestige interview, no carefully timed documentary reveal, no protective edit, just questions and whatever can be substantiated. And that is where the monarchy enters the frame, because if the underlying issue ever moved beyond gossip and into something legally or institutionally serious, it would not remain a private Sussex problem. British royal succession has always rested on old rules, and one of the oldest is that heirs must be born of the body. Whether modern audiences like that language or not, it matters constitutionally. If claims like these ever crossed the threshold from online suspicion into legally tested fact, the consequences would move far beyond embarrassment. That is why the source hints at palace anxiety, strategic distance, and even quiet consultation with constitutional lawyers. Whether that is overstated or not, the argument is clear. This is no longer framed as celebrity scandal. It is framed as a potential institutional threat. And through all of it, one point keeps surfacing because it is so brutally simple. If the allegations are false, transparency destroys them. That is why the source keeps returning to DNA testing as the cleanest possible end to the fight. One move, one answer, one final collapse of the speculation. In the source's logic, refusal becomes the story. Every legal warning without corresponding proof only intensifies suspicion. Every demand for silence makes critics sound more convinced they are standing near something real. That may not be fair, but in public controversy, fairness is not always what drives momentum. Silence, secrecy, and selective disclosure create their own weather, which leaves Harry in a very difficult position if the threat of legal action is real. Back down, and critics say the threat was hollow. Push forward, and the process may force a level of exposure that damages the Sussex brand far more than the original claims ever could. That is the trap, and it is what makes Lady C's response so potent. She is not just saying she is unafraid. She is implying that the side demanding silence may have more to lose from scrutiny than the side being accused of speaking out of turn. Tom Bower's posture, as described in the source, carries the same message. Not retreat. Not caution, readiness. So this story is no longer just about what may or may not be true about the children, the records, or the palace. It is about a collision between two instincts: the Sussex instinct to protect the brand and the investigator's instinct to force the sealed door open. And if that collision ever reaches a courtroom, the headlines will stop being the main event. The evidence will be. What makes this story so explosive is not just the allegation. It is the risk. Because the moment legal threats turn into legal action, this stops being a battle over headlines and becomes a battle over proof. And proof cuts through spin faster than any interview ever could. That is why Lady Colin Campbell's response matters. That is why Tom Bower's posture matters. They are not speaking like people under pressure. They are speaking like people who believe pressure helps them. And if that is true, then Harry and Meghan may have walked themselves into the one arena where status, branding, and carefully managed public sympathy no longer carry the same protection. At that point, the story changes. It is no longer about who can control the narrative. It is about who can survive the facts. And that is the real danger hanging over all of this. Because if nothing happens, the questions keep spreading. But if it does go to court, the fallout could reach far beyond Montecito. It could damage reputations, rip open years of secrecy, and force answers that can never be managed back into the box once they are out. So now everything comes down to one decision. Do Harry and Meghan keep using legal threats as a warning shot, or do they actually pull the trigger and risk turning this entire saga into a public evidentiary fight? Because if they do, this will not be remembered as another media feud. It will be remembered as the moment the story stopped being protected by silence. And if you want the full breakdowns, the sharpest commentary, and the stories everyone else is still too careful to say out loud, stay with Barz Buzz, where we do not just follow the headlines. We follow what is really at stake. If this saga had you shook, wait till you see what's next. You already know what it is. Barz Buzz got the real, raw, and unfiltered breakdowns. So don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with someone who needs to catch up.